is the widespread relationship between the royal family and Jimmy Savile. And we are talking extensive. I mean, this is just a brief selection of images. Jimmy Savile, not that anybody really needs reminding, obviously is now dead, but he was a child procurer for the British establishment. He was a necrophiliac, an abuser of hundreds of people from very young. I mean, it was estimated that he had a reach of age 8 to 80. But he was so much more than a DJ and BBC personality. Obviously, he became very known for his charitable work, was said to have raised in excess of £40 million, which back then was huge. It's still huge, obviously, but it bought him an awful lot of cover. And the thing is that I didn't cover this in the report because the report was about Charles and the Predators, because the reality is Jimmy Savile was not just Charles's mate. He was close to Queen Elizabeth II, the Queen Mother, to Prince Philip, to Diana, to Andrew, to Sarah Ferguson. In fact, here is what Prince Andrew tweeted when Jimmy Savile died. Let me just find this for you. I'm sure I've got it. Here it is. Duke of York. I'm very saddened to learn of the death of Sir Jimmy Savile. He was an entertainer, charity fundraiser, and close family friend. I've said this before and I'll say it again. You can't be a close family friend to the royals without your close protection and without secret services knowing that you have a nonce in your midst. And Jimmy Savile was extremely influential. It was really weird when I was preparing this report, and I realized that it was October the 1st onwards in 2012 was when the powers that be first decided that Savile was sufficiently cold in the grave that he could no longer talk. And the first media reports began to surface about his abuse, and as a precursor to a documentary that was due to air. And what happened, we heard that 214 crimes against Savile were recorded by 28 different police forces. The NSPCC put the number of reports of sexual abuse relating to Savile at a minimum of 500. And the thing is, Savile deserves a category in his own right, because despite the reviews and the investigations, despite the mainstream media documentaries, despite the wringing hands of Never Again, when we paid millions to run a child abuse inquiry, the royal family have never answered to their relationship with Jimmy Savile. This is yet another reason to abolish the monarchy. How can the royal family never answer to their relationship to do with Jimmy Savile? That's outrageous. Over several decades, this individual personally groomed and abused probably thousands of girls and boys in TV studios, as well as patients at NHS hospitals across Britain. That he was able to do so, and he wasn't apprehended, and then he was even knighted. Clearly, they were all close. He had the royal protection around him. He was able to get away with it. But the question that still remains is, was he procuring children from members of the royal household? Was he? Savile first came into contact with the Prince and Princess of Wales through his work for Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Buckinghamshire during the 1980s. Diana had opened a spinal injuries unit, and Savile, bit by bit, managed to ingratiate himself. He worked very hard, and he actually became really trusted amongst them. But you have to wonder why. It's because they were sharing secrets. Come on now. And you know what I think is really interesting is even in death, right? Even in death, let me just remove this. The media remained complicit. The media focused on Savile's relationship with the British government and Margaret Thatcher as one example, but they didn't dare ask questions about the royals. So these are typical headlines. Pedo ring inside number 10, picture of Savile. Savile, pedo ring linked to number 10. Another picture of Savile. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous. How they avoided the royal family. The royal family have never been asked about their close and enduring relationship with Savile, which was close and enduring, extremely so. And the thing is, after his death, you had idiot David Cameron, who almost certainly already understood how these things worked. And he had tried to get his knighthood rescinded. But the fact is, when you die, that automatically happens anyway. Here's Savile with his awards, by the way. Savile was honoured on a number of occasions. He was knighted, Sir, in 1990 on the Queen's birthday honours. He was made a Knight Bachelor for charitable services, which entitled him to use the prefix Sir. In 1972, previously, he had also been awarded in the 1972 New Year's Honours when he was appointed an Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, an OBE. And as I say, idiot David Cameron posthumously attempted to strip the honour. But the Cabinet Office actually stated that people cease to have the honour once they die. So there wasn't actually an honour to revoke. And honestly, it's ridiculous. David Cameron was Prime Minister at the time. There's no way he didn't know that. No way. And there's no way they would have made that public. He did that to try and make himself look good because Cameron was a suck up like everybody else. Obviously, these awards were given to him, and you don't need to be a genius to know that once you start accepting awards from the British establishment, you obviously, part of the deal is that you work to uphold and maintain that. There he is with his awards. Oh, just looking at his grotesque face makes me want to hurl. It's disgusting, absolutely disgusting. And the thing is, Jimmy Savile was so influential with the royal family that he was allowed to, and I'm quoting here, wander at will. And he had extraordinary influence. He was involved in the marriage of Charles and Di. He would turn up uninvited at the royal households. Richard Kay, who was a former royal correspondent, said, and I'm quoting Richard Kay, he inserted himself into their marriage in the way that he was someone who made himself available and Charles liked having him around. He would turn up uninvited. Diana had told Richard Kay this, that Savile would turn up uninvited at Kensington Palace where she lived. He would persuade the police on the gate to let him in. And the idea was that you never let anyone in without an invitation. But he was so influential, and he would say to Diana, well, I'm just here just to check up on you. And she said that Charles used to quip that if there was a problem that needed sorting out, they'll get Jim to do it because Jim will fix it. And how creepy is that? And according to Richard Kay, Savile would essentially come in and drift around Diana's apartment. He would rub the hands and shoulders of the staff. They described it as rubbing his lips up their arms. This is something he even did to Princess Diana. And she told Richard Kay that it was something very creepy. Well, ugh. Many of us already were, without knowing about the history of Jimmy Savile, many of us were naturally creeped out by him. There was just something really vulgar about him. Your solar plexus knew it. As I say, Savile put in huge efforts with the royals, absolutely magnificent effort. He was painstaking in cultivating a relationship with all of them. And mainstream media have sold us this idea that there was absolutely no way that the royals could have known about Savile. Well, I disagree. I think that there's absolutely no way that the royals could not have known about Savile. And I think that the reason that he was so close was that they were all complicit in the same secrets. That is my feeling about it. And you know what? There's a clip that I use in Paedophiles in Parliament, which I'm going to play now. And this tells you everything you need to know about how Jimmy Savile had complete access and could do whatever he wanted at the royal households. This is Jimmy Savile talking about an encounter with Prince Philip in Buckingham Palace. Have a listen to it. So let me just give you a little bit of background. Jimmy Savile is at an event at Buckingham Palace, and he meets two people who have been invited to the event. They're just regular people, not famous or anything. And they say that their daughter is in the car because although she couldn't come into the reception, she wanted to be able to tell people that she was at least in the royal car park. And so that's where Jimmy Savile takes it from here. Have a listen. This will tell you a lot about his influence.
Very good fix that I did with a young lady at Buckingham Palace. I was at a reception at Buckingham Palace. That's the place where the Queen lives and Prince
I know,
Philip.
they keep the Queen there, yes.
And it's not an easy gaff to penetrate. Very, very...
What's that? That an easy...
It's not an easy place to get into. That's
yes.
right.
Yeah.
So I was at this reception, and there was a very nice lady and gentleman said to me, my daughter would be so pleased to know that I've met you and this, that and the other. And I said, oh yes. Where is she? And they said, she's in the back of the car. I said, what, in the boat? And they said, no, we've sneaked her in the back of the car so she can say she's been in the palace courtyard. I said, and you've got her stuck out there? I said, oh, leave it to me. And they went, no, please don't. And they grabbed me. I said, no. So I went to see a minder and said, they've got this situation and I'm bringing a friend in. So I said, listen, who's going to object to you? So I said, all right. Now, the palace staff are the most excellent people, right? On the way out, I explained very briefly what I was doing. Leave it to us. So I went out into the car park, which is a courtyard inside the palace, and I shouted the young lady's name. Next minute, she's holding my arm, and next minute we're marching up the steps right into the palace. Well, the staff had done it right. The 2 footmen opened the 2 great doors, and inside there were all the majors and the colonels and the household staff. It's a most elegant situation and tremendously rewarding, right? And of course, when she sees this spectacle of the carpet and the people all standing there, and they all give a little graceful dip as she walked by, and she was now hanging onto me like a lifebelt. Understand? Right? And we walked up the steps and into the room where the reception was, in a room called the Bow Room, and fantastic look. Prince Philip, who was a marvellous geezer, happened to be just standing inside the door, parroting to somebody. So I went.
It's a pre-arranged signal, no doubt.
Well, no, there's not a lot of people go psst inside the palace. People do him. So he slung the butchers, right, like this. See me, and I do the nod. Put a kid away. So he doesn't know where this young lady's appeared from, with a long coat on and bumpy shoes, but he has given her the beautiful smile, and she's gone.
That tells you the power of Jimmy Savile, that he can go out into a royal car park where a child is being hidden in a car, and he immediately thought it was in the boot, by the way. And you see the language he used. It's very difficult to penetrate that gaff. That's feels quite sexual, feels quite smutty, very Jimmy Savile-esque. And then he talks about obviously bringing in the child and the security saying, who's going to stop you? Because that was the power of Jimmy Savile. And so then obviously he talks about how he went to the Bow Room and he saw Prince Philip. And Savile was someone who was a names dropper. He couldn't help dropping. He used the royal family hugely, obviously, but he also went too far and he realized he said too much. And at the end of that, so feel free to go back and look at it. But at the end of that, he starts to realize he's saying too much, because one of the things he says is that Prince Philip gives him the nod and says, put the kid away, right? All of it's weird language, but the overriding point is that Savile could do what the hell he wanted. He could rock up at the royal households, at royal receptions, take in strangers, and the security would say, who the hell is going to stop you? That tells you a lot about what you need to know in terms of what was going on in the royal household and the absolute impact that this man had. Here he is with Prince Philip, one of his muckers. And, you know, there's lots that I think is still uncovered regarding the royal family and Jimmy Savile. And one of them definitely has to do with Jersey. I mean, no doubt about that whatsoever. Jersey is a crown dependency. Which means it's a self-governing, but not independent entirely of the British crown. The monarch still oversees that. And we have a number of crown dependencies, and Jersey is one of them. And the reality is that there was this awful orphanage called Haute de la Graine, which many people, certainly watching Wake Up, will know about. And Jimmy Savile fought for years to not have himself associated with Haute de la Graine. He threatened the Sun when they were going to publish a picture, and in the end, they didn't, not until after his death anyway. Actually, it might have a year later. But what Jimmy Savile did, which is quite common with people like Jimmy Savile, is he used the threat of litigation to shut people up. And he did that regularly. And so what happened with Jersey? So the British monarch is the head of state for Jersey, and their representative on the island is the lieutenant governor. And Jersey has long been rumoured to be an absolute hotbed of child abuse. And that includes, Jimmy Savile and former Prime Minister Edward Heath. Jersey is a fiefdom. It loathes outsiders or anybody who attempts to pry. When cop Lenny Harper, who I've interviewed a number of times, a brilliant ex-cop, when he investigated Haute de la Garenne, they put him through hell. They did everything they could. They stalked him. They tried to get him off the island. They had their mainstream media friends on the mainland savage him. And Haute de la Garenne and Savile were investigated. But the thing about Jersey is it's protected by royalty. It's a world within a world, protected by royalty. And there was a 3-year inquiry into child abuse at Haute de la Garenne. Let me just bring in some imagery. Well, I don't think you can beat Savile and the Queen Mum really to highlight it. There's probably the Queen Mum saying, "Oh, look, here's Diana. She's the next one to be complicit in the lie." Because as an aside, even though Diana was always portrayed as a saint, she was still very much part of the royal family. She was close to Jimmy Savile, even though she found him creepy. So I'm pretty sure she had an idea about him. But anyway, back to Jersey. So Jersey had a 7.5 million investigation by Jersey police. The idea was to look at what they call historic child abuse. And from September 2007, police took 1,700 statements from 192 alleged victims. They identified 151 alleged abusers. 7 people were successfully prosecuted. And Jimmy Savile was a regular visitor to Jersey. And I would suggest that he was heavily protected by the royals when he was on Jersey, because the truth is, whether we like it or not, Jimmy Savile and the royals were super, super, super close. And I think none more so than Jimmy Savile and Charles, our current king. Our current king. I mean, that in itself is really problematic. This is just one of a dozen pictures of Jimmy Savile. This was taken in Glencoe in 1999. Prince Charles went to visit Savile's cottage in Glencoe in the Scottish Highlands. They were photographed laughing and joking together. And then they had lunch at Savile's 2-bedroom hideaway. And Savile had bolt holes all over the UK. God knows what he was doing in them. And Charles loved and appreciated Jimmy Savile with a endless and enduring passion. On Savile's 80th birthday, Charles marked the occasion with presents and an extraordinary letter. And he wrote, "Nobody will ever know what you have done for this country, Jimmy. This is to go some way in thanking you for that." Jimmy Savile was an advisor to Charles and the royal family. Prince Charles trusted Jimmy Savile on everything from marriage guidance to checking speeches. I mean, Charles sent him a number of handwritten notes, and Charles asked for help on advice to do with Sarah Ferguson and Andrew, because even then they had red flags all over them. But Prince Charles also sought advice and guidance from Jimmy Savile, a BBC DJ, on his big speeches. As one example, on April the 16th, 1990, Charles asked for Savile's help in making a speech at London's Guildhall. He wrote, "You are so good at understanding what makes people operate, and you're wonderfully skeptical and practical. Can you cast an eye over this draft and let me know how you think we can best appeal to people?" Then a following message was, and this was sent from Highgrove House: "Dear Jimmy, I can't tell you how grateful I am for the most useful assistance you have provided for my speech in the Guildhall the other day. It was really good of you to take the trouble and put together those splendid notes and provide me with considerable food for thought." And Savile was also used to mediate between Charles and Diana when their marriage was falling apart. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. The familiarity in the relationship between Jimmy Savile and Charles and Jimmy Savile and Diana was clear for all to see. Letters still available that Diana wrote to Jimmy Savile. And that's why I find it kind of hard to believe when you have people like royal reporters like Richard Kay who come out and say Diana found Jimmy Savile really creepy. Well, she might have done, but somehow she still managed to put up with that and still managed to write to him in really affectionate terms. Here's one example of a letter that she sent Jimmy Savile. It says, "Dear Jimmy, I'm sorry to have been out of touch for so long, but I know you have been busy and I fear you may just have noticed that I am still alive too." And in the letter, Diana discussed Broadmoor, one of the places that Savile was known to have abused people. It's a high security mental health hospital. And Diana often visited due to her patronage in the mental health space. And particularly with the British charity that was known as Turning Point, not the Charlie Kirk Turning Point, another Turning Point. And at Broadmoor, Savile, as I say, was known to have abused numerous patients during his decades there as a volunteer. And we were told horrendous things about him. And Savile was also brought in to help, as I say, to help with issues surrounding Sarah Ferguson and Andrew, both of them absolutely useless pair. And Charles wrote to Savile about Andrew. Andrew had the Lockerbie tragedy happened, and Andrew had gone in and saying it was much worse for the Americans and it was only a matter of time before a plane fell out of the sky. That is what Prince Andrew, who had been sent to the Lockerbie site, had said. And so they then, for whatever reason, they got Jimmy Savile in to help school the royals on how they should be speaking appropriately. And one of the letters that Savile sent to Charles was following Andrew going to Lockerbie and say it was only a matter of time before a plane fell out of the sky. Right. And so Charles wrote to Savile, "What I really need is," he started by saying, "Perhaps I am wrong, but you are the bloke who knows what's going on." Yes, no, you weren't wrong, Charles. Savile was the bloke that knew what was going on, only not necessarily what the public thought was going on. And Charles continued with, "What I really need is a list of suggestions from you. I so want to get to parts of the country that others don't get to reach." Sounds like a beer commercial. And so then the day after Andrew had made that faux pas, Charles wrote again to Savile about Sarah Ferguson and said, "I attach a copy of my memo on disasters, which incorporates your points and which I showed to my father, and he showed it to HM." So HM being the Queen. So both the Queen and Prince Philip were receiving notes crafted by a BBC DJ. That ain't no just BBC DJ, please. And then Charles had written to him about Sarah Ferguson. "I wonder if you would ever be prepared to meet my sister-in-law, the Duchess of York." Because they knew, right? They knew there was a real problem with Andrew and Fergie right back all the way then. They knew it. But they kept it hidden from us for decades, as long as they possibly could. And he said, "I wonder if you would ever be prepared to meet my sister-in-law, the Duchess of York. I can't help feeling that it would be extremely useful to her if you could. I feel she could do with some of your straightforward common sense." And Savile bragged about that. He claimed that Charles had asked him to rehabilitate Sarah Ferguson. And that was after a toe-sucking episode. But there was more. They knew there was more going on. And they knew about the friendships that were existing between Andrew Epstein and Sarah Ferguson. And they absolutely, unquestionably knew that Andrew and Sarah Ferguson were compromised by the international paedophile. But why would they care when the whole family was compromised by Jimmy Savile, also an international paedophile and procurer of children for the British establishment? The other thing that Jimmy Savile said, and I found it quite unnerving, when he was talking about being brought in to help give advice to Charles and the royal family on, as I say, an assortment of things, including marriage guidance, including the scandals, including giving speeches. And I'm directly quoting Jimmy Savile. He said, "The thing about me is I get things done. I work deep cover. People don't realize I'm deep cover until it's too late." Yeah, indeed, because you were protected.